Good evening, everyone. My name is John Hughes. I'm the music director of Chicago Master Singers. Welcome to another session of CMS University. Whether you've been watching us since August or tuning in for the first time tonight, I'm glad you're here and want to make sure that everyone feels welcome. Now, one of the ways that we are building community during this time when we're still staying apart is through the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen. So first, make sure you're logged into YouTube, and then you can join that conversation. As time allows, I'll look over at it, and if there are any questions for me, I'll put them up on the screen and give it the old college try here to answer them fully. I just ask that anything for me is started with 3 or 4 question marks in a row so I can quickly kind of see what that is. All right, so our topic tonight is one that is really interesting, and I know CMS toured to the Baltic regions in 2012, and so this will interest some of you. And it's something I've known a little bit about, but I've enjoyed learning more about it as I've gotten ready for this presentation, and I'm excited to share some of what I've learned with you tonight. Now, a few things just right away that I have found very helpful that I want to pass on to you. The first is that my dissertation advisor, Dr. David Puterbaugh at the University of Iowa, is one of the preeminent Estonian choral scholars in the United States. And I'll be citing some of his research at the end of this evening. But just know that there's a great connection in our local area, and he's really the one that introduced me to a lot of this music that I'll be presenting tonight. There's also a documentary that I've mentioned a long time ago in another CMS University session called The Singing Revolution. This is from 2006, and it's available for free on Amazon Prime Video. So if you're a member of Amazon Prime, you can watch this for free. It's really a very fine documentary. I have to say maybe the first half of it is maybe a little bit slow and kind of sad with the obvious subject matter. But then it really picks up at the end and is very, very interesting. So I really recommend that. Finally, there are 3 albums called Baltic Voices 1, 2, and 3 that came out in the early 2000s. And these were really the vehicle through which many American conductors were introduced to Estonian and other Baltic countries' choral repertoire. So these 3 are very important. And if you aren't familiar with them, I would highly, highly recommend checking them out. All right, so a little bit about Estonia to begin. First of all, you have to understand its geographic position. You can see it's kind of juts out into the Baltic Sea, bordering Finland and Latvia, Russia and Latvia, right across from Finland. And this gives it a very important strategic position, geographically speaking. And unfortunately, because of this just valued land area, Estonia has endured many foreign occupations. The most famous, obviously, is the USSR occupation from 1940 to 1991. But for centuries, Estonia was also ruled by German crusaders. And we see that the German influence on Estonia pretty strongly in their music, and we'll talk about that. But they've also been occupied by Denmark and Poland and Sweden and Russia. So it's been kind of up for grabs in a lot of ways, and that has influenced its music. But it's really important to understand that. So a little bit about its culture. Because it was occupied for so long, native Estonians were really relegated to serfdom until the 19th century. Now, there was a period in the early 20th century when they were an independent country, and this is when their culture really flourished. But then they were again occupied by the USSR from 1940 to 1991. Now, because they were serfs for so long, a lot of their music was really relegated to the folk tradition, which you'll see when I talk about kind of significant Estonian composers. Almost all of them really draw on this folk tradition. It's really, really important to them because for a long time, it's all they had. It wasn't really until the late 19th or very early 20th century that art music comes to Estonia. And that's when we see the development of more classical forms of music. Now, one of the big bearers of music education to Estonia was Moravian missionaries who brought hymnody to Estonia. And at first it was in German. And this then really set into motion this discovery of Western classical music. And then that is really the model, the German model for Estonian choral culture going forward. So the other big thing that you need to understand about Estonia is its song festivals. These began in 1869 and have happened every 5 years since, even during that occupation by the USSR. And this was a way that Estonia could maintain its own identity through these ups and downs of being occupied, right? Now, at first, like all of Estonian choral music, it began kind of in the Germanic form. It was kind of existing German pieces with Estonian texts kind of retrofitted to it. But then since then, it's really been a point of allowing Estonian culture to thrive and singing their folk music and singing their choral music to develop the sense of national unity. Now, I'm going to show you a video here in a minute of what this looks like. But Laulupidu, or what they call the Song Festival, is a real national event. It happens over a period of days. And you can see from the slide here that there's about 80,000 people in attendance and about 30,000 people in the choir. And they bring in different conductors throughout the festival to lead the singing. And so this is a significant portion of the Estonian population is actually at Laulupidu. And then it's kind of like everyone who isn't physically there is watching it on TV. So this is a real moment of national pride. So I'll just show you about 40 seconds of a performance from a recent Laulupidu to just give you a sense of the scale of this thing. I love seeing all the folk dress, and we'll see that in some other videos tonight, that folk dress and culture and language and music is so important to preserving their kind of national identity. Okay, so the singing revolution refers to how Estonia peacefully broke away from the USSR in 1991. As I mentioned, from the early 20th century, they were an independent nation. This occupation happened, and it really kind of dampened the progress that they'd made in terms of national identity in the early part of that century. Now, during the foreign occupation, all art was censored, and they really had to conform to Soviet norms. And this Laulupidu was an opportunity for them to reconnect and reaffirm their own identity, right? And it's kind of surprising in a way that the Soviet Union allowed these to continue, because it really was a galvanizing force for the Estonian people. And when they broke away from the USSR completely peacefully, mind you, it was in large part due to the kind of the resurgence of national pride that was accomplished through these singing festivals. And there's a great quote from that documentary that says, if 20,000 people start to sing one song, like you just saw, You simply cannot shut them up. It's impossible. So it's a really interesting story, and I encourage you, if you're interested in learning more, to watch the full documentary. Now we're going to kind of shift gears here and talk a little bit about some representative composers from Estonia. And they're all going to be fairly recent, within the past 125 years or so, because that's kind of the scope of the Estonian choral tradition as we know it today. Now, the first person we're going to talk about is hailed as the grandfather of Estonian choral music, or just Estonian classical music, and that is Rudolph Tobias. As you can see at the third bullet point, he was the first Estonian to compose in many genres: symphony, the cantata, piano concerto, piano sonata, string quartet, and oratorio. Remember, kind of before this, their music was folk music, so it wasn't necessarily part of notated music. It was an oral tradition, which is equally lovely. It's just different than what we're talking about today. Now, you'll also notice that Tobias studied in Russia with Rimsky-Korsakov, and we'll see this again throughout this evening, that composers are going to Russia to learn and then coming back and using that to bring Western art music to Estonia. Now, the piece that we're going to listen to is really a church anthem, and I chose this one because I think it really demonstrates the influence of those Moravian missionaries on Estonia, especially here at the early 20th century. That was what their music sounded like. So we'll listen to a portion of this piece here. So you can kind of hear a little bit of kind of late 19th century German composition and a little Russian influence there, but a very straightforward piece that I think is a really nice introduction to the Estonian aesthetic, if you will. Okay, the next composer is a gentleman named Kreek, who we really start to see the influence of Estonian folk songs. And from my understanding, he not only integrated them into his compositions, but he collected them. This is something we see happen at the beginning of the 20th century in many cultures, right? We think about Vaughan Williams, for example, collecting the British folk songs from the countryside before they're kind of lost to industrialization and globalization. So, Vaughan Williams and Holst and Kreek in his own country were doing this. Now, Kreek was a very prolific composer, writing over 450 choral pieces, including the first Estonian setting of the Requiem. He also taught at the Tallinn State Conservatory, Tallinn being the capital of Estonia. Now, this piece that we're going to listen to is, you hear this folk, kind of sincere, pastoral quality to this lullaby that I think is very typical of Estonian music. So again, we'll listen to a portion of this piece. My apologies for the low volume. It's as high as it goes. I think that must be the YouTube video. It's also a very soft lullaby, so hopefully the next one isn't quite so soft. Okay, the next composer we're going to listen to is known as the first lady of Estonian music. Her name is Ester Mägi, and she's 99 years old here, and she's written a lot of choral music, and that really is her primary focus. She really composes choral music as her sole output. Originally, though, she was a pianist. Now, many of her works, she wasn't just a collector of folk music, but she integrates it into her compositions herself. So they are very, she uses these folk songs as motivic material. Now, this piece we're going to listen to, Laikutele, is a setting of a poem that means to the bards. So kind of a similar feel to the poem To the Music Makers, if you're familiar with that. And the last line I thought was very poignant. It says, "The world abounds in beauty, life, and pain, yet only their little trace is apparent in your songs." I actually sang this at the University of Iowa with Dr. Peter Baugh, and the recording that we are going to listen to is by the Webster University Chamber Choir in St. Louis that is conducted by another Iowa grad student. And so you can see Dr. Peter Baugh really loves Estonian music and shares it with his students. So enjoy this piece. One thing that I've noticed in a lot of Estonian choral music is that tends to be very ethereal. The pieces tend not to be too long. They tend to write very succinctly. But even though the pieces tend to be slow, they aren't afraid to have some dissonance in there and some dynamic shifts from very soft to very loud. And then finally, to have a lot of text, right? You'll notice a lot of eighth notes with kind of rapid fire text in a lot of their music. And I don't know why, but it's just something I've noticed as I've been preparing for this presentation. The next composer we're going to listen to is probably the second most famous Estonian composer, and his name is Veljo Tormis, who passed away a few years ago. You can see, like many other people, he taught in the Tallinn School of Music and studied in Russia. And more than any other composer, his music really integrated the Estonian folk tradition into the art music. He also, because he lived and worked in the USSR occupation, right? 1940 to 1991, that's most of his life, right? He used his music as a vehicle to protest against this occupation. And that's really evident in the piece that we're going to listen to tonight, which is called Paris Malase la Luce. And this means an Aboriginal song. And I've conducted this one before, and I have my score, and I want to show it to you. There's only one word here, and that is taboo, which translates to taboo. And this is a protest against the censorship that he was enduring, that a lot of his pieces were not allowed to be performed or published because of the censorship. But somehow this one got through and is really a one-word protest, right? And you'll notice in the score things like agitato, right? So agitated, right? He wants us to be very fast with a drum and it's very primal sounding. Now you'll notice it's scored for soprano and tenor on one line and alto and bass on another, but sometimes people play with that voicing. The recording we're going to listen to actually is for all tenor bass voices. But anyway, it's two parts only and a drum, and it's going to start very soft, and then there are going to be subito fortissimo moments and some kind of very scary moments. And again, that's just replicating how he was feeling. But you'll notice it starts here in unison, and then when we get here, we're going to get into parallel seconds, so very dissonant. I'll play it a little under tempo so you can hear. From the beginning, we're in unison. And then now we divide. Oh, sorry. Right, so he's kind of musically voicing his opinion that he thinks this occupation is unfair. So we'll listen. This piece isn't too short, but again, it is not necessarily pretty, right? It's going to sound very primal. But again, that's part of music. I want to just show you the score for one thing. I was following along during that performance, and I thought I forgot about this, that at a certain point they just stopped writing the word because there's a lot of repetition in this piece, and as Janet is noting in the chat, there's a lot of repetition in the Estonian style, and I don't have an explanation about why, and that might just be the musical, the few selections we're listening to tonight are like that, but I don't have a better answer for you. Okay, let's end tonight by talking about the most famous Estonian composer, Arvo Pärt. Now, he was born in Estonia, but has lived in Berlin for the past 40 years or so. And he studied with Tormis, who we just listened to. So you'll hear a little bit of that influence in his style. But the biggest influence on Pärt and his compositional voice is his faith. He joined the Russian Orthodox Church in the early 70s. I believe Estonia is a primarily Lutheran country, in part due to its the German crusaders there and the Moravian influence. But he joined the Russian Orthodox Church in the 70s, and that really influences his overall aesthetic and his minimalism. He is part of what we call the holy minimalists of choral music, and that includes himself, Sir John Tavener, who I know CMS has performed his setting of Blake's The Lamb, or A Song for Athene, Hymn to the Mother of God. So we hear a lot of those kind of pieces, and Gurecki. So those three composers are part of this holy minimalists of the 20th century. Now, I mentioned that Pärt is considered a minimalist, meaning he uses few musical materials, but really, manipulates them in a way to form entire pieces. Now, some of you may have heard of the American school of minimalism that's kind of typified by Philip Glass and Steve Reich. I love their music. Einstein on the Beach, Philip Glass's opera, I think is genius. I love that. This is totally different. Pärt's minimalism is quite, it's just different. It's much less frenzied and much more placid and calm. Now, Pärt has developed this technique called tintinnabuli in his music, and that's referencing bells. And basically, it's very homorhythmic, meaning all the voices are moving at about the same time. It's diatonic. There aren't accidentals. It's staying within the notated key signature. And there aren't many changes to tempo or key. Now, tintinnabuli has two voices. The tintinnabuli voice, the T voice, which is only singing notes in the tonic triad. So the next slide will have a piece of music in D minor. The two T voices are only singing D, F, and A, the pitches of a minor triad, a D minor triad. The other voices are considered the M voices, the melodic voices, and they are weaving in and out of that triad, going through it and away from it, and usually stepwise around the triad. And Pärt says that this really represents redemption and forgiveness, the steadiness and stalwartness of the T voice, outlining that triad, that sense of home, and the melodic voice wandering and going and coming, and that it's Pärt in his faith represents this solidity and also wandering and then returning home. So let me show you a little bit of this is from Pärt's Te Deum. And you'll notice I've labeled here, this is choir 3, so this is a big piece. But you'll notice here, I've labeled the soprano and tenor are the T voices. And as I said, this piece is in D minor. These voices are only singing D, F, or A, the tonic triad here, right? And that's what makes them the tintinnabuli voice. So you'll see they're not singing in unison, but they're singing only those 3 pitches in various combinations. So I'll play just the first few measures of the soprano and tenor parts. Then the alto and bass are considered the melodic voices, the M voices, because they're moving stepwise around in and out of that triad. So their voices sound like this. And then all together, it sounds like this. So you can hear there's some really beautiful dissonance in there, but it's kind of within this frame of, I use the word placid, and that I think really comes out of his Russian Orthodox faith, and that just kind of aesthetic of holiness and holy stillness in his music. And there's this great quote from Pärt that he says, "I have discovered that it is enough when a single note is beautifully played. This one note, or a silent beat, or a moment of silence comforts me. I work with very few elements, with one voice, with 2 voices. I build with the most primitive materials, with a triad, with one specific tonality." Right? So when a lot of 20th century composers are writing atonal music and switching meters and doing very extended compositional technique, Pärt returns kind of to the atomic level of music and finds this meaningful beauty in simplicity. And I find it really moving. And I'm going to play now part of this. Is, you know, the Te Deum by Pärt is quite long. We're going to listen to just a few minutes, but this is a really fine recording, and Pärt was in the audience for this. And it was recorded in Tallinn. So I hope you enjoy a little bit of it. You might not, the tintinnabuli isn't necessarily apparent to the ear, but maybe now that you understand that technique a little bit, maybe you can kind of understand the overall aesthetic that he's going for here. I wish I could play more, but it's a lovely, lovely piece. And I do agree with everyone. Get some headphones, turn out the lights, and light some candles and listen. And it's really kind of profoundly moving piece. I see some other questions. I'll get to them just in a minute. Let me just show just a kind of some concluding things here. First of all, some other notable Estonian composers are listed here. We've actually talked about the third and fourth ones listed here, both as moments of Zen. The first, Sisask, we listened to his Oremus from Gloria Patri. That's the one where he uses that planetary scale, and the choir was singing kind of in front of a picture of the universe, right? And so we listened to that. The other one is Per Usberg. This goes way back to the fall semester. We listened to his piece O'Toole. So I've been kind of weaving in some of this Estonian music throughout the year here, and encourage you to check out all of this. Here's some suggested reading if you're interested in learning more. Estonian music, because it's relatively new, is a very hot research topic. So there's a lot of people doing work on it, and you can see some articles here outlining lots of different aspects of the Estonian choral tradition. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I recommend that Singing Revolution documentary as well as the 3 Baltic Voices albums. But Dr. Peterborough actually in 2019 recorded a choral CD, A Black Birch in Winter, in Estonia, and it's both American and Estonian choral music of the 20th century. I really recommend this as well. It's been very well received in the choral community. So if you're interested in learning more, there are those books and articles as well as these things that you can listen and watch. All right, before we get to our moment of Zen and other housekeeping things, I'll take a second and look at the chat and answer a few of these questions. I saw, going back here to Birch, asked me, follow up from last week about the making of a modern edition. How do you choose the piece? How did I choose the piece that I turned into a modern edition? That was the subject of my dissertation work. Part of my dissertation did not include making a modern edition, so it's kind of an extension of that work. But I really got interested in Lechner and his Passion setting because I knew I wanted to do something from that time period and kind of centered in Germany, just based on my own background. And I just kept coming across the name of Lechner and discovered that, everyone kind of cites this Passion setting as being important, but there wasn't really a lot of work done on it, right? So, that's kind of the quintessential dissertation, right? Find someone's footnote of someone and blow it up into a long paper, right? And so that's kind of my approach, but I've been really pleased with it, and it's yielded a lot of fruit over the years. So that's how I got interested in it. Let's see, there was another question here by Martha asking, do the instrumental parts in Pärt's compositions also conform to Tintinnabuli as well? I believe so. But yeah, I believe so. I have to say, though, I don't know any of his non-choral works except the really famous Spiegel im Spiegel, Mirror in the Mirror, which, if you don't know Spiegel im Spiegel, that's another piece to listen by candlelight. It's really breathtaking. And I believe that one does use Tintinnabuli. Let's see if there's any other questions here. I think that's it. Well, before we get to our moment of Zen, just a few quick housekeeping things. First of all, thanks for joining me tonight. I know there's a Cubs game on. The end of the NCCA men's basketball tournament is on in just a little bit. I would promise myself I'd get you out of here before then. But thanks for making time for CMS University, and I hope you'll come back next week. I'll be talking about 4 choral ensembles in the United States that are kind of legacy ensembles that have really inspired choral music making in our country. So we'll talk about the Handel-Haydn Society in Boston, the Tabernacle Choir in Salt Lake City, the St. Olaf Choir in Northfield, Minnesota, and Chanticleer out in San Francisco. So kind of geographically dispersed. Each choir has its own focus, but each is also very important into developing the choral culture that we live in. So please come back for that. We'll be listening to examples from them, and it should be a really fun evening. You can register for that using the Eventbrite link in the video description below. I hope too that you'll spread the word about CMSU. You can always go back and watch recordings of previous sessions. You can pass it on to a friend or family member, subscribe to our YouTube video and our chat. You can, our channel, and you can also like this video. I've seen some thumbs up coming in throughout the evening, and that always feels good. If you're able to make a financial donation, we'd appreciate that, not only to keep CMSU going, but also to keep CMS going through this pandemic as we hopefully come out the other side as strong as ever. Thank you very much for any support you can give. All these links are in the video description below. All right, our moment of Zen tonight is one of my favorite pieces, and I remember very fondly performing this piece with some of you at the Green Lake Festival of Music a couple years ago, and that is Angel Band by Sean Kirchner. I find this piece to be very serene and kind of warm and reassuring, that if for those of us who have met Sean, is very emblematic of him as a person. This is a really special piece to me, and I hope you enjoy it. This is a really good recording too by the Atlanta Master Chorale with Eric Nelson conducting. Thanks again for joining me this evening. I hope you're doing well and staying healthy, enjoying the warm weather. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week for another session of CMSU. Until then, take care and have a good night.